Taking a look at the modern film landscape, studios seem to have a general consensus that creating cinematic universes is the way forward. The obsession with creating cinematic universes seems like a natural evolution of studios' obsession with creating sequels. Audiences can find comfort in brand recognition. When looking for a film to watch, it's easier to return to the familiar, as it requires less explaining than a more experimental or unique concept. For an average viewer, a film like Vivarium requires a harder sell, explaining the story and the metaphorical aspects, as well as trying not to give too many plot spoilers. But if someone asks what Spider-Man Far From Home is, you can simply tell them that it's the new Spider-Man movie or the new Marvel movie. Marvel and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the most successful example of this, and seems to be the gold standard that everyone is aiming for. The MCU is the biggest action universe, and the horror equivalent would likely be the highly successful Conjuring franchise. Made within the last decade, the franchise consists of 7, soon to be 10 movies. Much like the action cinematic universes attempt to copy the MCU, it shouldn't be surprising that horror universes would also try to copy The Conjuring. A recent example of this is The Boy, which attempts to clone the Annabelle spin-off trilogy. Since The Twilight Zone, haunted, cursed, or possessed dolls have been appearing in horror films like Poltergeist, Child's Play, Puppet Master, Silent Night, Deadly Night 5, Annabelle, Heidi, Robert, and today's focus, Brahms, or The Boy. The first The Boy film did feel somewhat different, not solely dragging and dropping what had come before. After 2 acts of generic scenes of the doll moving about when nobody's around, the third act reveals that the whole time there was a boy living in the walls moving the doll around, meaning that the doll was just a doll. For some audiences, this worked as a surprising twist, defying expectations of what to expect in a haunted doll movie. Others felt like the film had simply replaced one overdone cliché with another, and audiences were still made to sit through generic, fake-out jump scares and mediocre filmmaking to get to that point. It didn't seem to be setting up a sequel at all, telling a self-contained story that ended when the film did. However, after the film saw mild financial success, plans were made to create a sequel. When making a sequel to The Boy, one big question is present. How do you make The Boy 2 when the original film revealed that the doll wasn't haunted, smashing the doll's head open and killing off the boy controlling it? The cheesy and obvious way to solve this problem would be to make the recently deceased boy's spirit actually possess the doll after being killed alongside the doll's destruction. This would have been made for a pretty terrible film, but it would have taken some incredible work to make a genuinely well-made sequel to The Boy. The actual film somehow ended up being even worse than expected. The film models the formula in the original Child's Play and the universe building of The Conjuring and Annabelle, whilst also trying to expand the story of the original The Boy. The standard haunted doll formula is for dolls to move off screen whilst the protagonist leaves the room, only to come back and find the doll in a different position. The Child's Play franchise doesn't quite follow this, with Chucky moving around and speaking freely after the first film's reveal. Chucky can get away with things that other haunted dolls can't for 2 main reasons. Whilst Child's Play is technically a doll horror movie, the film falls under a different subgenre than the other doll horror flicks. Most haunted doll movies are supernatural horrors, whilst the Child's Play franchise is a slasher series, as well as featuring a couple of comedy installments. Chucky walking around acting goofy feels more natural, as that fits with what the series is. Brahms doing this feels unnatural, as it doesn't fit the tone that the series sets up in every other aspect. The good guy doll in the Child's Play franchise is also not haunted in the way that a lot of other haunted objects in movies are. Charles Lee Ray, a murderer, actually used voodoo to possess the body of a good guy doll, giving it the name Chucky. Brahms can be seen pulling cheesy grins, moving his eyes around like a Scooby-Doo painting, and towards the end of the film ends up walking around freely, even having his head smashed open to reveal a demonic face underneath. Hey, what about the previous film when his head got smashed in and nothing was underneath? The film alone is pretty terrible, but it's these inconsistencies with the predecessor that drop it down even further. The more installments a series has, the more likely it is to accidentally contradict the rules of the universe that it's set in. But Brahms The Boy currently only has 2 films and has already contradicted almost everything that it has set up. In just 2 films. The decision to make a sequel to The Boy already somewhat ruins what the first film set up, which intended to subvert the usual expectations of a generic dull horror movie. Sequeling it with a generic dull horror movie opposes what the original The Boy stood for. On top of this, the law of the universe was broken on multiple occasions. Not only is the Brahms doll actually alive now, it turns out that it has always been alive and even haunted families before the one in the first film. This means that the Brahms doll was alive and controlled by a boy who happened to also be called Brahms, getting him to control the Brahms doll to make the doll appear haunted, even though the Brahms doll was actually haunted. The doll was completely destroyed into tiny little pieces, though the new film sees him in mint condition. Sure, Finchie patched the doll back together, but there should have been at least some indication that the doll was mishandled. Also, the smashed doll in the previous film had nothing underneath his head, yet suddenly the boy too sees a demonic being underneath his porcelain face. Brahms ended up doing all sorts of crazy things, including causing an explosion and lifting a guy up like he was Darth Vader. These extreme moments and lack of continuity repeatedly shatter any suspension of disbelief the audience tried to maintain. A lot of films have continuity errors and inconsistencies, as making movies is hard. But the more films you have in a series, the more likely it is that inconsistencies will appear. But the Boy series only contains 2 films. The second film mentions many other Brahms encounters and ends with a generic "Brahms is still out there" warning. It seems to want to be the next Annabelle trilogy, despite the original film trying to be the anti-Annabelle. The Boy is a textbook example of how not to set up a film series or cinematic universe, getting almost everything completely wrong.